The scissors flash under the ballroom lights as he smiles, and the crowd laughs before realizing I'm bleeding. I stand near the aisle with the wireless mic already warm in his hand, its black grill catching the glare like a small sun, and I keep my shoulders square because collapsing would give him what he wants. The room smells like champagne and roses, and the sound system hums with that anticipatory buzz that makes people generous with applause. He steps closer, close enough that I can hear the fabric whisper before it screams, and when the tearing starts, it feels less like pain and more like theft, something being taken that I didn't consent to give. "Smile," he murmurs, his breath practiced and sweet, and the word lands like a command he expects to be obeyed. Someone laughs too loudly, someone else claps on reflex, and a phone lifts at the edge of my vision because cruelty performs well when it's framed. I count exits because that's what I do when I need control, and I note faces because witnesses are currency later. "This is a celebration," he says into the mic, voice smooth, and the speakers carry it across the room, turning his lie into atmosphere. I feel the tug again, the fabric giving way, and I don't look down because looking down would invite commentary. "Easy," he adds soft enough that only I hear it, and I hear the confidence in the word, the certainty that the room belongs to him. The bride doesn't move. She stands like a photograph, perfect and distant, her stillness louder than any objection. "You agreed to be here," he says, eyes on mine now, and the implication is a blade. I think about the child inside me and the way people flinch from discomfort, how silence grows when embarrassment blooms. "Hold the mic higher," a technician whispers from somewhere, and the wireless mic tilts a small adjustment that magnifies everything, including the rip that draws a collective intake of breath. He laughs, and it's the laugh of a man who believes the stage is a shield. "Relax," he tells me, and the word becomes an order again, reinforced by the way the room wants to move on. I hear a woman say, "Is this part of it?" and a man answer, "Must be," and that's how harm slides by wearing a costume. I keep my hands at my sides because grabbing the dress would look like a fight, and fights are easier to misread than traps. "Don't make a scene." He whispers the phrase sharpened by irony, and I see the phones steadier now, lenses hunting for reaction. "Your badge is blue. Mine is cleared." Don't pretend, he adds under his breath, a needle line meant to remind me who he thinks holds access, and the cruelty is precise enough to sting. The mic crackles as he shifts his grip, and the sound is a warning that the system is live, that every breath could be amplified if he chooses. I feel the fabric tear again, smaller this time, surgical, and I taste copper because adrenaline has its own flavor. "It's just fabric," someone near the front says, trying to be kind, and kindness misfires when it refuses to see. He straightens, lifts the mic, and thanks everyone for their patience, and the applause returns like a tide because people love permission. I scan the doors, the staff, the sight lines, because the room is a machine, and machines respond to inputs. "Read the clause out loud," he mutters with a smile meant for the crowd. The room should hear it, and I understand that he wants language to drown me next. The light above us burns clean and white bleaching shadows until there's nowhere for them to hide, and my calm isn't bravery so much as arithmetic. Under the brightest light, cruelty needs witnesses to survive, and he believes the room is loyal to him. He leans in once more, fingers brushing the torn edge as if checking his work, and I feel the mic vibrate with his breath. "We're done," he says aloud, a closing statement disguised as mercy, and the room nods because endings are comfortable. I don't move, not yet, because timing matters, and the machine is still warming up. He squeezes the mic and smiles, unaware the room has already begun counting against him. "I'm Rachel Monroe, 33, an event logistics coordinator from Scottsdale, Arizona, and I learned early that calm is a tool when rooms turn hostile." The past version of this night began weeks earlier when the folded guest list arrived in my inbox as a PDF that looked harmless until I printed it and felt the crease like a fault line under my thumb. I was pregnant then too, newly enough that strangers still debated whether to congratulate me or pretend not to notice, and I accepted the invitation because declining would have looked like bitterness, because silence can be weaponized against women who are expected to disappear. I arrived early, on purpose, Flat shoes, neutral dress, shoulders set to invisible, and I took the folded guest list from the check-in table with a nod that said, I knew how systems worked. "You're early," a coordinator said, eyes flicking to my stomach, and the flick carried a question I refused to answer. "It helps everyone," I replied, and the consequence was a thin smile that granted me space. I scanned the ballroom lights and felt the heat they threw, the way brightness exposes intent if you let it. The bride's side was already filling laughter, bouncing off glass and linen, and I traced the exits the way I always do, not because I plan to run, but because knowing paths steadies me. "Your seat is near the aisle," the check-in assistant said, finger hovering, and the hover was the first wrong note. "That's not what we agreed," I answered, keeping my voice level, and the consequence was a pause long enough to draw a glance from security. "It's what's printed," she said, and the folded guest list crinkled in my hand like a small animal. I didn't argue yet because arguing too early creates noise without leverage, and I needed quiet. "Can you confirm the table code?" I asked, and the consequence was a swallow, a blink, a second look at the page. "Blue section," she said too fast, and the speed told me something had been decided without me. I walked the perimeter, watching how staff spoke to each other, how the ops manager moved with authority that came from knowing which switches mattered. "We'll need the aisle clear," he told a server, and the consequence was chairs sliding an inch inward, tightening sightlines. I felt the door chain tension in my chest, the subtle sense that entry and exit were being negotiated by someone else. "You don't have to stay a mutual acquaintance," whispered kindness, shaped like retreat, and the consequence was my head turning just enough to acknowledge her without accepting the offer. "I was invited," I said, and the room absorbed the sentence, without comment. The groom avoided me with professional precision, greeting donors, hugging relatives, his smile calibrated to cameras, even when none were obvious. "He looks good," someone murmured, and the consequence was a ripple of agreement that smoothed the air around him. I stood under the lights and let my eyes adjust, letting brightness do what it does when people underestimate it. The folded guest list was wrong, not in a dramatic way, but in a logistical one that could be explained away if you weren't looking closely, and I was always looking closely. The lights were too bright to hide behind. I noticed the bride's stillness, the way she occupied space like an object rather than a person, and I cataloged it because patterns matter. "Do you need water?" a server asked, eyes kind, and the consequence was my hand lifting in refusal because accepting help can be read as weakness in rooms that hunt it. I took a breath and tasted sugar and citrus and the faint electric smell of warm equipment. "You're on the list," the assistant said again. Reassurance layered over error, and the consequence was my finger tapping the fold where my name should have been aligned differently. "Read the table code out loud," I said softly, and the consequence was a flush climbing her neck as she complied. "Say it again. Your title is coordinator, not mine." A voice cut in behind us, amused, and the needle line stung because it named hierarchy as a joke. The consequence was a few heads turning, laughter thawing. I didn't look back because reacting would validate the frame. "Everything okay?" the ops manager asked. "Neutral." And the consequence was my nod, paired with the folded guest list, raised just enough to signal a problem without stating it. "We'll sort it," he said, and the consequence was his eyes memorizing the page. I felt the child shift, a reminder that time is not abstract, that choices stack. Under clean light, small errors arranged themselves into intent. I moved to the edge of the aisle and tested how visible I was from the stage, how a camera might see me, if one existed, how laughter landed when it needed permission. You don't owe anyone anything. My phone buzzed, and the consequence was my pocket going silent, because texts are traps in public rooms. The groom finally crossed my path close enough to register cologne and confidence. "Thanks for coming," he said, words polished, and the consequence was a hand hovering near my elbow without touching. "It's a big day," I replied, and the room accepted the neutrality like a contract. "We'll start soon," a planner announced, and the consequence was bodies aligning attention, focusing doors, closing with soft authority. I folded the guest list again, smaller this time, and tucked it where I could feel it, paper against skin, a promise of order. "Smile," someone joked nearby, and the consequence was a chorus of easy compliance that made my jaw set. I watched the ops manager check a watch, and then a door, the sequence telling me where pressure would come from later. "Seats, please," a voice carried, and the consequence was a tide of motion that placed me exactly where the list wanted me, not where I belonged. I stood there anyway because standing is sometimes the only way to refuse disappearance. The lights burned steady, the air thickened with expectation, and I felt the machine of the room settle into rhythm. I held the folded guest list like a quiet ledger, already balancing what the room would soon owe. I left the brightness of the ballroom for a service corridor that smelled like citrus cleaner and warm cables, the venue key card, cool and ridged in my palm. And I told myself I was only checking logistics because that's what people like me do when something feels off. The door accepted the key card with a polite green blink, a small permission that felt larger than it was, and the consequence was immediate access to a quieter world where voices dropped and attention thinned. Staff only a sign reminded me, and I complied by moving like staff posture neutral steps, efficient eyes forward. A catering runner passed with a tray and said, "Careful without looking," and the consequence was space opening in front of me as if I belonged. I needed confirmation, not confrontation, and confirmation lives where paper and screens agree. The back office hummed with printers and radios, and a clipboard lay open on a desk beside a laptop that displayed a seating grid, rows of names and codes too tidy to be innocent. "You're not supposed to be back here," a voice said, light but curious, and the consequence was, my turn, slow practiced. "Ops asked me to verify aisle clearance," I replied, and the venue keycard did the rest of the talking by existing. He nodded, already busy again, because authority is often a costume that works if you wear it calmly. I leaned in just enough to read without touching the grid, resolving into sections and colors, table numbers, and badge bands, and there it was. My name truncated to fit, slotted into a blue section that contradicted what I'd been told at check-in. 2 fields mattered, and both were wrong. The table code reading B14 when the email I'd saved promised A03, and the badge color flagged blue instead of the neutral band I'd been issued. "That's odd," the staffer murmured, noticing my pause, and the consequence was his finger tapping the screen as if proximity could fix intent. "Sometimes last-minute changes," he added, and the phrase tried to soften what numbers refused to hide. I said nothing because silence invites people to keep talking. The list came down from the couple, he continued, eyes on the grid, and the consequence was the confirmation I needed delivered without drama. I took a breath and let the room's fluorescent light flatten everything, let clarity do its work. The seating grid had a reference code at the corner GL7C and a location note labeled Ballroom East, details small enough to be missed by anyone not looking for them. Safe fields that anchored truth to place. I memorized them, then took out my phone, and didn't photograph anything, because being seen photographing creates a story I wasn't ready to tell. "You okay?" he asked, finally sensing tension, and the consequence was my nod, paired with a neutral smile that closed the exchange. "Just confirming," I said, and confirmation is a word that sounds harmless until it isn't. As I turned, my elbow brushed the desk, and a stack of printed lists shifted, the soft scrape loud in the quiet. And the consequence was a glance from the doorway that lingered a beat too long. All good, a supervisor called tone managerial, and the consequence was my keycard. Lifting slightly, a talisman that shortened questions. "All good," I echoed, and the door accepted me back into the corridor without complaint. My heart didn't race because fear is inefficient. Instead, my mind cataloged. The change wasn't random, and it wasn't clerical. Blue section meant visibility from the aisle at a specific angle, meant cameras if any were mounted for the ceremony, meant proximity that could be framed as consent if someone wanted to rewrite the moment later. "Wrong table," a guest muttered as I passed, glancing at my wristband, and the consequence was a small correction I didn't make, because corrections draw attention. I returned to the edge of the ballroom and felt the temperature change, the light returning like a stage cue, and I slid the venue keycard into my pocket with the folded guest list paper against plastic intent against access. "You look pale," someone said kindly, and the consequence was a glass of water offered, which I declined with thanks because accepting would tether me. The groom laughed somewhere near the front, his voice carrying the ease of someone who assumes alignment, and the consequence was the room relaxing around him. I scanned faces and found the ops manager by the control rack, posture alert eyes moving between screens, and I filed that away because allies often look like infrastructure. 10 minutes a planner announced, and the consequence was bodies settling, conversations tightening. I checked the exits again and noted how the blue section funneled attention toward the aisle, how sightlines converged exactly where I stood. The realization didn't hurt. It clarified. "That seat number isn't yours," a woman whispered sharply as I adjusted, and the consequence was a brief flare of embarrassment that I let burn out without feeding. "I'm aware," I said softly, and the words did double duty as acknowledgement and refusal. The lights burned clean and unforgiving, and I felt the door chain tension in my chest ease into focus. This was a placement, not a mistake, a logistics problem dressed as courtesy. Under full light, the grid aligned into a choice someone else had already made for me. I shifted my weight and tested how much the venue keycard pressed through the fabric of my dress, a reminder that access existed even when power pretended it didn't. The ops manager caught my eye for half a second, enough to register that something had been seen, and the consequence was a micro nod that promised nothing and everything. "We're starting the planner," said again louder, and the consequence was applause warming up like an engine. I tucked my phone deeper away and folded my hands because hands tell stories when they fidget. The seating grid lived in my head now. GL 7C Ballroom East B14 versus AO3 Blue versus Neutral. A contradiction that would matter later when words tried to outrun facts. The groom took the mic to thank everyone for coming early, voice buoyant, and the consequence was laughter blooming on cue. I stood where I'd been placed and let the room believe what it wanted for a few more minutes because evidence needs time to breathe. The key card pressed into my palm as the room arranged itself around a lie it hadn't noticed yet. The ballroom snaps into attention the way a room does when it senses permission, and the projector remote feels heavier than it looks when Daniel Cruz palms it at the tech table thumb, resting near the button like a held breath. The wireless mic hums as it changes hands, a soft feedback that tells everyone the system is live, and I stand where the blue section funnels eyes toward me, my posture calm enough to pass as compliance. Before we begin, the groom says, smiling broadly, a quick thank you, and the consequence is applause warming on cue, hands meeting because they've been told it's safe. The bride's veil doesn't move her face, a composed still, and I catch Alyssa and Gwen 2 rows back, lifting her phone without meaning to habit overtaking discretion. Daniel's eyes flick to mine, and then to the screen, a neutral exchange that looks like nothing to anyone else. "We had a little seating hiccup." The groom continues into the mic, voice playful, but it's all sorted, and the consequence is laughter that skims the surface of the room. "Read the clause out loud," he adds under his breath as he passes me. Needle sharp, the room should hear it, and the cruelty lands with a grin meant for witnesses. The lights are bright enough to make every face readable, and that's the point. Clean light turns rumors into facts if you let it. "Mic check," a technician says, and the consequence is a tap that sends a hollow pop through the speakers, attention snapping tighter. Daniel lifts the projector remote. A fraction waits, then lowers it again, because timing is a kind of language. "I want to acknowledge someone special," the groom says, eyes sliding to me, and the consequence is a ripple of curiosity that pulls phones higher. "She's been very patient," he adds, and patience is the word people use when they want silence to sound like virtue. "Say it again, your title is guest, not family." He murmurs, cruelly specific, and the consequence is my jaw setting as the room leans in without knowing why. "Hold on," Daniel says into his headset, barely audible, and the consequence is a soft click from the control rack as a channel opens. The projector warms a low fan, whispering behind the screen, and dust motes appear in the beam like confessions waiting to be read. "We'll play a short message," the groom announces, hand tightening on the mic, and the consequence is a collective inhale that tastes like anticipation. Daniel presses the remote just once. Sound comes first clear, intimate, before image, a voice amplified that everyone recognizes because it's the groom's caught earlier in the day near the service corridor, the ref code GL7C flashing small in the corner, the location tag, Ballroom East, understated and damning. "Keep smiling," the recorded voice says. "Too close. Blue section aisle angle cameras love it." And the consequence is laughter that stutters, then stops. A few people clap reflexively, and then falter, as comprehension catches up, hands hovering midair like birds, unsure where to land. "That's out of context," the groom says quickly into the live mic, and the consequence is feedback squealing as two channels overlap the system, betraying him. "You signed the log earlier than this," a guest mutters from the side, recognizing a tone, and the consequence is a murmur spreading like heat. The bride turns her head for the first time, eyes narrowing, and the consequence is a hush sharp enough to hurt. "Turn it off," the groom snaps, voice pitched for authority, and the consequence is nothing happening because Daniel doesn't move. "Protocol," Daniel says calmly, loud enough to carry "We finish the clip," and the consequence is a pause where power recalibrates in public. The audio continues, a second line surfacing that shouldn't exist if the story were clean. "Seat her where the light hits the recorded voice," adds casual people won't notice if they're laughing. And the consequence is the witness wave collapsing into silence. Then avoidance eyes sliding away as if the floor has become interesting. "This is a joke," someone offers weakly, and the consequence is the projector finally throwing image, grainy but unmistakable, of the mic being tested near the aisle, earlier time-stamped, to a moment that contradicts the groom's claims without announcing itself as a verdict. "That badge is blue." The groom hisses at me, leaning close enough to fog my cheek with breath. Mine is cleared, and the consequence is his face magnified on the screen behind him as he speaks, the irony brutal and immediate. Daniel lowers the volume a notch, surgical, letting the words land without drowning the room. "We need to move on," the groom says louder now, appealing to momentum, and the consequence is a woman in the front row shaking her head slowly, "No." Alyssa's phone is steady, her wristband visible, and the consequence is documentation that will exist whether anyone likes it or not. "This violates policy," the groom says, trying a different register, and the consequence is Daniel's reply, cutting cleanly. "Policy requires transparency," a phrase so bland it becomes a weapon. The crowd's reaction completes its arc confusion to laughter, to silence, to something like shame, and people shift in their seats as if the chairs have grown teeth. "We're starting late," a planner whispers, clock pressure creeping in, and the consequence is the groom glancing toward the doors as if time might rescue him. "Read the clause out loud," he tries again, softer, and the consequence is the projector's fan swelling as the image sharpens, refusing to obey him. The room realizes at once that the laughter was rehearsed, and the cruelty wasn't. Daniel clicks the remote again, freezing the frame. At the moment the mic tilts toward me, the ref code still present, the location clear, and the evidence sits there without commentary, bright and unashamed. "Turn it off," the groom says, voice cracking now, and the consequence is a ripple of phones lifting higher because cracks invite recording. "We'll pause," Daniel announces official, and the consequence is staff moving to doors, velvet ropes easing into place, control reasserted without force. The bride swallows the first human gesture she's offered all night, and the consequence is a line of sympathy she doesn't yet understand. "This isn't appropriate," an uncle says, attempting rescue, and the consequence is a woman behind him whispering, "It already happened, truth," arriving late but firm. The lights stay bright, refusing to dim for comfort, and I feel the child shift again, a reminder that bodies remember, even when rooms pretend not to. The groom steps back from the mic, smile gone, and the consequence is a space opening around him that no one fills. Daniel lowers the remote and meets my eyes once more, a question without words, and I answer by staying still, because stillness now is consent to truth, not silence. The planner announces a brief delay, and the consequence is a buzz of restrained conversation that never quite rises because the screen still glows. "We'll fix this," the groom says to me, trying intimacy, and the consequence is my reply, landing level and audible enough for the nearest ears. Read what you already said, which draws a few sharp breaths and a nod from someone who understands leverage. The doors remain guarded, the screen remains lit, and the evidence breathes in public without naming itself. The projector hums on, holding his voice in place, while the room decides who it belongs to. The delay stretches thin like sugar pulled too far, and I follow the sealed legal envelope into a side room that smells of toner and warm plastic, a place designed for problems to be flattened into forms. The envelope is heavy because paper carries consequences when it's prepared correctly, and I set it on the table without opening it, letting the weight speak first. "We need to reset the planner," says voice tight, and the consequence is a flurry of radios chirping as staff redistribute bodies away from the glow of the screen. The groom paces just outside the door, footsteps quick and shallow, and every pass scrapes the same patch of carpet until the pattern announces panic. "This can't go out," he says to no one in particular, and the consequence is a technician answering. It already did, calm as policy. I breathe in through my nose and taste dust and citrus, the residue of rooms that host other people's certainty. The incident log sits open on the counter, a clipboard with a spine bent from use, and I don't touch it yet because touching makes claims. Observing lets truth volunteer. "We're logging the pause," Daniel says from the doorway, neutral, and the consequence is a pen, clicking once before ink meets paper. "Read the clause out loud." The groom snaps, pushing in the room should hear it, and the cruelty is precise enough to bruise. But the consequence is Daniel's reply, even, "This is back of house." The log entry fills itself line by line, location noted as Ballroom East reason, recorded as audio discrepancy, and a time mark appears that doesn't match the groom's story by minutes that matter. I don't need exact numbers to feel the fracture. The shape of the error is enough. "That's not accurate," the groom says, pointing, and the consequence is Daniel lifting the clipboard slightly out of reach an inch that might as well be a wall. "You signed the log earlier than this," someone murmurs behind him, a needle line delivered by a cousin who recognizes handwriting, and the consequence is a flush that climbs too fast to hide. I open the sealed legal envelope just enough to confirm contents without exposing them, the whisper of paper like a held breath, and I feel steadier for it because preparation is a kind of warmth. We can fix the seating the planner offers, bargaining with logistics, and the consequence is the realization that seating was never the real issue. The groom leans close, dropping his voice, trying intimacy again. "You're embarrassing yourself," he says, cruelly specific, and the consequence is my reply, landing flat. "This isn't about me," which leaves him without a target. The incident log absorbs another line as Daniel adds a witness note, and the consequence is a quiet rearrangement of power that looks like boredom if you don't know what to watch. "Turn the lights down," the groom orders toward the ballroom, seeking mercy in dimness, and the consequence is nothing happening because lights belong to ops, not ego. I feel the child shift and place a hand on my abdomen, not for comfort, but for grounding, because bodies are evidence too when stories try to erase them. "We need consent to proceed," Daniel says into his radio procedural, and the consequence is a pause long enough for the room outside to invent explanations that won't hold. The groom laughs too loud, attempting reset by noise, and the consequence is a few heads turning away, the first social cost arriving. "Read the clause out loud," he tries again, voice frayed, and the consequence is Daniel meeting his eyes and saying, "Later a word that moves the clock without stopping it." The incident log now shows a clean contradiction, what was claimed versus what was recorded, and I don't have to say it for it to exist. The log doesn't argue, it simply refuses to agree. The planner peeks in, eyes darting, and whispers about schedules slipping, about vows, waiting about donors restless, and the consequence is pressure tightening in a place it can't be hidden. We're proceeding, the groom declares, attempting authority by volume, and the consequence is a staffer blocking the doorway with an apologetic smile that says, "Policy again. Your badge is blue." The groom snaps at me, grasping for hierarchy. Mine is cleared, and the consequence is... Daniel's voice cutting in. Clearance is situational, which draws a few surprised looks, because truth sometimes arrives wearing plain clothes. I tuck the envelope back against my side and feel its edge a reminder that options exist beyond this room. The incident log receives its final mark for the pause, the pen lifting cleanly, and the consequence is finality of a small sort that stacks with others. Outside the ballroom hums with speculation, a restless organism, sensing that something has gone wrong. "We can salvage this," the groom says softer now, and the consequence is my silence, because salvage implies consent to the frame. I step past him into the light without speaking, carrying the envelope, and the knowledge that timelines don't lie unless people force them to. As I cross the threshold, the clipboard stays open behind me, holding a version of events he can't revise. The time-stamped CCTV still waits in a quiet corner of the ops room, pinned to a monitor like a moth under glass. And when Daniel tilts the screen toward me, the light catches it cleanly, refusing mercy. The image is ordinary at first glance. An aisle, a mic stand, a figure adjusting cables. But ordinariness is how contradictions hide until you hold them still. Entrance cam, Daniel says, voice level. And the consequence is the room shrinking to the rectangle of proof. The stamp sits in the corner, modest, exact enough to matter, marking a moment that shouldn't exist if the groom's version were true. I lean in without touching, counting pixels the way I count exits, and feel the door chain tension ease, because timelines don't argue back. We don't circulate stills without cause. Daniel adds procedural, and the consequence is my nod, because cause has a shape now. The groom's voice leaks in from the hall, louder than necessary laughter trying to muscle its way past walls, and the consequence is a pressure that clarifies priorities. That's before guests were seated. I say, keeping it factual. And the consequence is Daniel tapping the time mark, once, twice a gesture that turns implication into statement. The image shows the mic being tested near the aisle, angled exactly where I stood. Later, the light overhead already burning bright, and the stamp contradicts the claim that nothing was prepared. It aligns with the audio, Daniel says, and the consequence is the pieces clicking together without drama. I feel the child shift and place my palm flat on the table, grounding myself, because the echo of the light is here too, what brightness reveals when it refuses to dim. Under that same light, timelines stop lining up. The phrase lands in my head and settles not poetry so much as diagnosis. "We have to be careful," a supervisor murmurs from the doorway, eyes on the hall, and the consequence is the acknowledgement that public pressure is building. "Careful doesn't mean quiet," Daniel replies, not looking away from the screen, and the consequence is a recalibration that favors record over reputation. I ask what it would take to sync the still with the audio already played, and the consequence is Daniel's mouth tightening in thought, then easing. "A few minutes," he says, "and permission," and the consequence is the legal envelope pressing against my side, reminding me that timing is leverage. The groom appears in the doorway, then smile half-assembled eyes, flicking to the monitor despite himself. "This is ridiculous," he says, tone attempting camaraderie, and the consequence is the still freezing at a moment that shows his hand near the mic, a shadow angled wrong. "That's not what it looks like," he adds, and the consequence is Daniel's answer arriving clean. "It looks like time." The groom scoffs, tries another angle. "We're burning daylight," he says, appealing to donors, schedules, optics. And the consequence is the supervisor checking a watch and then the door clock pressure tightening. "Turn it off." The groom order's voice sharpened, and the consequence is nothing changing because authority is a ladder with rungs, not a shout. "Your badge is blue," he says to me again, reflexive. Now mine is cleared, and the consequence is Daniel's calm correction. Clearance doesn't rewrite footage. A tech begins syncing files, fingers moving with practiced neutrality, and the consequence is a progress bar inching forward, each increment a small betrayal of impatience. I think about the blue section and the aisle angle, and the way preparation masquerades as coincidence until light insists otherwise. If this goes public, the groom says quietly, threat dressed as concern, and the consequence is my reply, staying measured. It already did, which removes his leverage by naming reality. The still updates sharper now, a second stamp appearing that brackets the moment with context before guests, before vows, before the lie, and the consequence is a truth that doesn't need commentary. We need legal eyes, the supervisor says finally, and the consequence is my phone vibrating once with a name I've been waiting for counsel ready on standby because preparation isn't loud. The groom exhales through his nose, anger leaking out as dismissal. This won't stick, he says, and the consequence is the monitor reflecting his face back at him, doubled by glass, a man arguing with time. We proceed carefully, Daniel says into his radio setting, a boundary the room accepts because it's operational, not emotional. Outside applause tries to restart thin and uncertain, and the consequence is the realization that momentum has shifted. I step back from the screen and let the light wash my hands, feeling steadier than I have all night, because contradictions are heavy until you set them down. The supervisor nods once decision made, and the consequence is doors staying controlled a little longer. The groom turns away, jaw tight, and the consequence is the quiet knowledge that every move from here will be recorded, if not by cameras, then by people who learn to watch. The still holds its place on the screen, anchoring the night to a minute he can't escape. The audio recorder is smaller than the tension. It captures a matte black rectangle. Alyssa Nguyen slips into my hand as if passing a receipt, and the consequence is immediate awareness that witnesses become tools when they choose to be. I was sitting row 3 aisle, she whispers, wristband brushing my sleeve blue section, and the specificity lands like ballast. We step into the quieter spillover space near the bar, not hidden but peripheral, where conversations overlap enough to disguise intent. Say it again, your seat number is 3, I prompt gently, and the consequence is her nod. Voice steady as she repeats it into the recorder, naming the wristband type and the angle she saw when the mic tilted. The groom's laughter spikes from the ballroom too loud, trying to bully momentum back into place, and the consequence is heads turning with narrowed eyes. He said, "Cameras love it." Alyssa continues swallowing once, and the recorder's tiny light blinks to confirm it's listening. I don't interrupt, because interruption fractures testimony. Letting it run makes truth heavy. Daniel appears at the edge of the space, posture neutral, and the consequence is a nod that acknowledges process without claiming sides. We're holding doors, he says quietly, and the consequence is clock pressure tightening just enough to matter. The groom pushes through, then smile brittle eyes darting to the recorder before he schools them. This is harassment, he says loud enough to seed doubt, and the consequence is... Alyssa's shoulders stiffening as she finishes her statement anyway. Read the clause out loud, he adds. To me defaulting to script, and the consequence is my reply staying even. Not here. He leans closer, voice dropping. You're making this worse, he says cruelly specific, and the consequence is the recorder capturing the edge in his tone without needing my commentary. Keep smiling. Your email header is on the screen, a guest mutters from behind him, half joking, and the consequence is a ripple of uncomfortable laughter that doesn't last. I end the recording and tuck it away, feeling the weight of a witness choosing clarity over comfort. The room tightens as voices become records instead of rumors. A planner hustles past with a headset askew, whispering about schedules collapsing, and the consequence is donors checking watches, impatience bleeding into suspicion. We need to proceed. The groom announces toward the ballroom, attempting authority by declaration, and the consequence is Daniel stepping into the doorway with an apologetic smile that blocks him without touching. Protocol, Daniel says again, and the word lands heavier each time because it has teeth now. My phone vibrates once more. Maya Rosen, counsel on standby, as promised, and the consequence is the sense of a chain forming behind me, legal links locking into place. This is defamation, the groom snaps, pointing at the recorder as if objects can be intimidated, and the consequence is Alyssa's quiet correction. I was there, which lands harder than any statute. He scoffs, turns on me. Your badge is blue, he repeats, voice rising. Mine is cleared and the consequence is Daniel's calm interjection. Clearance changes when witnesses speak a sentence that rearranges the room's hierarchy. A server drops a tray somewhere, the crash sharp, and the consequence is silence blooming as attention resets. The bride watches from a distance, now veil finally shifting, and the consequence is a line of sympathy she can't spend yet. We can talk privately, the groom offers trying the old door, and the consequence is my refusal without words as I keep my hands visible and still. The ops supervisor confers with Daniel in low tones, glancing toward the control rack, and the consequence is a plan forming that doesn't include improvisation. Alyssa steps back, breath shaky, but eyes clear, and I squeeze her wrist once in thanks, because courage needs acknowledgement before it evaporates. We'll need the recorder, Daniel says, procedural, and the consequence is my nod as I hand it over chain of custody, beginning without ceremony. The groom swears under his breath, frustration leaking, and the consequence is a few guests turning away from him at last. This ends now, he says, trying to close a door that no longer exists, and the consequence is the supervisor answering not yet, because timing belongs to those who prepare. I move toward the ballroom with Daniel, the hum of equipment growing louder, and the consequence is the sense that the next step must be public or it won't hold. The recorder's red light fades, but the witness stays lit in the room's memory. The clipboard with the incident log feels suddenly lighter when Daniel flips it open again, not because the paper weighs less, but because the story it carries has changed direction and the room senses it before anyone names it. We're in the back office where the hum of printers sounds like restraint, and the air tastes faintly metallic from cables warming under load. We need the internal email, Daniel says, procedural, and the consequence is a tech swiveling a monitor toward us, fingers poised above a search bar that doesn't forgive vague requests. The groom's voice leaks through the wall, rising and falling, as he tries on tones like jackets, and the consequence is a tightness in my chest that resolves into focus when the inbox populates. There the tech says tapping once, and the consequence is a subject line that shouldn't exist if this were accidental, marked with a short ref RMX82 and a location tag reading back office. I don't touch the screen. Touching claims ownership before you're ready. Open it, Daniel says, and the consequence is a click that sounds too loud for the room. The email is operational, bland enough to pass unnoticed, instructing staff to adjust seating sightlines and optimize aisle visibility with a line about blue section placement that lands like a dropped plate. That's not standard, the supervisor murmurs, and the consequence is the clipboard receiving a fresh notation as if the paper itself understands escalation. I read the email twice, once for content and once for tone because intent hides in phrasing. Read the clause out loud. The groom barks from the hall, timing his interruption to fracture attention, and the consequence is Daniel closing the door without asking. Later he says again, and the word moves the clock forward without granting relief. A time of day stamp appears in the email header, 11:17 a.m., modest, precise, a single pin that holds the contradiction in place, and I feel the room tilt as the implication settles. That's before check-in, I say, and the consequence is the supervisor nodding once, decision made without drama. The clipboard shifts, hands the incident log aligning with the email's timing, and the chain tightens because paper agrees with paper. This email instructs staging. Daniel says careful, and the consequence is the tech exporting it to a secure folder. Fingers moving with the reverence of someone who knows custody matters. The groom pounds the door once, then laughs a sharp sound meant to break spell, and the consequence is nothing breaking because the spell is operational, not emotional. This is a misunderstanding, he calls through the door, and the consequence is the supervisor answering. It's an instruction, a sentence that rearranges blame. I feel the child shift and steady myself with a hand on the table because bodies feel reversals before minds accept them. The clipboard's metal clip glints under fluorescent light, and the incident log gains a line noting internal directive, located language dry enough to survive court. We need counsel eyes, Daniel says, and the consequence is my phone lighting with Maya's name on standby, turning into present tense. Send it, she texts, and the consequence is the tech attaching the email masking identifiers except the ref and location, because precision protects. Doors will open in minutes, the planner whispers from the hallway clock, pressure sharpening, and the consequence is Daniel's reply. After this, a boundary drawn without raising his voice. The groom tries a new angle, lowering his voice to intimacy through the door. "You don't want this," he says to me, cruelly specific. "Think about the baby, and the consequence is my answer, staying level I am, which removes his leverage by naming it." Alyssa appears at the doorway, eyes wide, and the consequence is Daniel motioning her back gently, because witness safety matters too. The tech confirms the export, a soft chime sealing the file, and the consequence is a shift in posture across the room as people straighten roles, clarifying. We proceed to sync. Daniel says, meaning the email with the footage already prepared, and the consequence is the plan snapping into place like a well-set hinge. The email turns the story inside out, proving the placement wasn't cruelty's accident, but its blueprint. The groom goes quiet on the other side of the door, silence replacing bluster, and the consequence is a few staff exchanging looks that say they understand where authority actually lives. The clipboard closes with a gentle click, the incident log complete enough to breathe on its own, and I realize the reversal has landed not with a shout, but with alignment. We move toward the ballroom together, the hum of equipment growing the light ahead, brighter than before, and the consequence is certainty replacing endurance. With the directive logged and exported, the trap tightens and the doors reopen on our terms. The USB drive sits in an evidence bag on the counter, like a held breath, translucent plastic crinkling, when Daniel slides it an inch closer to me, and the consequence is a choice arriving with edges. The ballroom noise seeps through the walls again, restless now, conversations colliding as people sense a turn without knowing its shape. "This is the draft," Maya's voice says on speaker, steady, her presence filling the room without her body needing to be there, and the consequence is gravity settling into the moment. I open the legal notice just enough to confirm the masked case ID. 82 printed clean at the top, the office location generic and correct, and the words precise enough to survive scrutiny. "If you proceed publicly," Maya continues, "you anchor jurisdiction here, and the consequence is the room understanding that timing isn't just optics, it's law." The groom hovers in the doorway again, anger compressed into a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "We can still fix this," he says, trying intimacy one last time. And the consequence is Daniel stepping between us with a courteous half-turn that blocks him without confrontation. "Private conversation later," Daniel says, and the word later lands like a locked drawer. The USB drive contains the synced footage and audio labeled with the same ref code and location that have already done their quiet work, and the consequence is that denial will have to fight on two fronts at once. Read the clause out loud. The groom snaps reflex, turning brittle, and the consequence is Maya's voice cutting in calm and surgical. "He won't." The groom scoffs, but the sound is hollow now, and a few staffers glance away, as if embarrassed for him. "You're overplaying this," he tells me cruelly. Specific blue badge. "Remember?" And the consequence is my reply, staying factual. The badge isn't the record. Clock pressure tightens as the planner whispers about donors leaving, about vows delayed, about cameras outside, starting to gather, and the consequence is the realization that delay favors the guilty when witnesses get bored. "We proceed?" Daniel says not loudly, and the consequence is a tech nodding fingers already moving to cue the projection sequence from the USB. The groom's jaw flexes. He looks toward the doors as if escape might still be available. "If you do this," he says, voice low. Threat dressed as warning. There's no going back, and the consequence is Maya answering before I can correct. I feel the child shift again and breathe through it, grounding myself, because bodies remember courage as much as fear. The legal notice draft sits open now, its language spare and exact naming actions, without adjectives, and the consequence is a path forward that doesn't rely on persuasion. "We'll need security ready," the supervisor murmurs, and the consequence is Daniel's nod toward the earpiece authority seated and standing by without spectacle. The groom tries humor, then anger, then silence, each failing faster than the last. "This isn't appropriate," he says to the room at large, projecting through the wall, as if volume could create consensus, and the consequence is a few muffled laughs that die immediately. "That seat number isn't yours," someone replies from the ballroom voice carrying, and the consequence is a shiver through the hallway as the story leaks out ahead of the proof. Daniel lifts the evidence bag slightly, making sure the USB is visible, and the consequence is the tech confirming the input on the projector with a soft chime. Once it's up, Maya says, "We let it play," and the consequence is discipline becoming a shield. The groom steps back at last, face-tight calculating, and the consequence is my understanding that the decision has already been made by the room, even if the reveal hasn't happened yet. I pick up the evidence bag and feel the smoothness of the plastic, the simplicity of it, how truth sometimes travels best when it's unadorned. With the drive cued and counsel aligned, the night narrows to one unavoidable reveal. Daniel opens the door to the ballroom lights spilling into the hall, like an invitation that doesn't ask permission, and the consequence is a hush falling as people see us return together. The groom's smile collapses into neutrality as he watches the projector glow to life, and the consequence is a line being crossed that can't be stepped back over. The USB clicks into place, committing the room to a truth it can't unsee. The bright stage spotlight snaps on with a soft electrical sigh, bleaching the ballroom into clarity, and the consequence is every face becoming readable at once, nowhere to look that isn't seen. Daniel sets the USB into the projector input and steps back, hands visible, posture neutral, and the projector hums as if it understands the weight of what it's about to do. "We'll resume," the planner announces, voice thinner than before, and the consequence is a hush that settles like dust after a door slam. The groom lifts the wireless mic by reflex, smiling for the room, and the smile holds for a second too long. "Thank you for your patience," he says, attempting reset, and the consequence is the spotlight catching the tightness around his eyes. "Read the clause out loud," he mutters toward me as he passes needle-line muscle memory, and the consequence is Daniel's quiet interjection, mic down a sentence that moves power without raising volume. The screen brightens behind them image first. This time the aisle frozen at a moment that shouldn't exist if this were accidental. A ref code sits unobtrusively in the corner, the location tag, Ballroom East small but stubborn. The audio follows, synced cleanly. The groom's voice captured earlier in the day, intimate and unmistakable. Blue section aisle angle cameras, love it. The consequence is a ripple through the crowd, laughter aborted mid-breath, hands lowering phones, rising. "That's edited," the groom says, into the live mic overlapping channels again, and the consequence is feedback squealing once before Daniel mutes him with a practiced tap. The bride turns fully now, veil shifting, and the consequence is a collective intake of breath as the image advances. The CCTV sequence plays timestamp to a minute that contradicts every public claim, showing the mic tested under the same clean light, the same angle preparation, without apology. "This violates policy," the groom shouts without amplification, and the consequence is a woman near the front saying, "He said it plain as weather." The witness wave completes itself, confusion to silence, to avoidance, as people lean away from the aisle that once promised spectacle. "You signed the log earlier than this," a voice calls from the side, recognizing the handwriting freeze frame that flashes briefly, and the consequence is a murmur that doesn't need encouragement. Daniel lets the sequence finish disciplined, then freezes the final frame where audio and image agree. "We're pausing," he announces, official, and the consequence is staff stepping to the velvet ropes doors, guarded without drama. "Turn it off," the groom demands, face flushing, and the consequence is nothing happening because commands don't outrank records. The spotlight stays bright, refusing comfort. "This is a private matter," an uncle protests, grasping for tradition, and the consequence is Maya Rosen stepping forward from the side badge, visible voice calm. Not anymore. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. On behalf of my client, she continues measured. We're entering this record into custody. The consequence is Daniel nodding once, chain of custody moving smoothly as the USB is lifted back into its bag. Only then does authority enter, not first, not theatrical, but precise 2 uniformed officers at the rear door, guided by the ops supervisor's hand signals, eyes scanning for safety rather than drama. The room goes still in a way that feels earned. "We need to ask you some questions," one officer says to the groom, tone neutral, and the consequence is his laugh breaking soundless. "You can't be serious," he says, trying incredulity, and the consequence is the officer answering, "We are, because seriousness isn't loud." The bride swallows, hands clasping, and the consequence is sympathy shifting direction without asking permission. Phones are up everywhere now, screens glowing like small mirrors, and the consequence is a record multiplying faster than denial. Read the clause out loud. The groom tries one last time, voice cracking, and the consequence is Maya's reply, landing clean. "You already did." The officers guide him a step aside, not away, not yet just enough to break the illusion of command. "We'll need statements," one says, and the consequence is Alyssa lifting her wristbanded hand without being prompted, courage steady. The spotlight remains on the screen holding the frame that changed the night, while the ballroom exhales a long collective breath that sounds like relief and reckoning at once. Under the unwavering light, the proof speaks for itself, and authority follows without asking permission. The hard copy notice letter feels crisp when Maya places it on the glass podium paper, squared to the edge, as if alignment itself is a verdict, and the consequence is a hush that isn't imposed but earned. The spotlight has softened to a steady wash, now not merciful, just done, proving what needed proof, and the room's energy shifts from spectacle to process. "We'll proceed with statements," an officer says, neutral, and the consequence is people standing straighter because clarity has rules. The groom doesn't speak. His silence is new, unfamiliar, and it hangs heavier than any defense he tried earlier. "Please state your name for the record," the officer continues, and the consequence is the night turning procedural, the safest shape it can take. Maya slides the notice letter forward an inch enough to be read by anyone close the language spare and exact no adjectives to argue with. "You're being notified," she says, measured of pending actions and preservation requirements, and the consequence is the groom's jaw tightening as he recognizes the shape of consequences without hearing their weight yet. The bride sits down for the first time, veil pooling, and the consequence is a few murmured words of support, drifting toward her sympathy, redistributing without instruction. Daniel confers quietly with the ops supervisor, the projector dimmed but not off, and the consequence is the equipment powering down in the correct order record secured. Alyssa steps forward to give her statement. Wristband still visible, voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. And the consequence is the room understanding that courage can be ordinary. "Seat 3 aisle," she says, and the officer nods, writing, because specifics carry farther than outrage. "Blue section," she adds, and the words land like coordinates that map the night. The groom finally speaks, trying to regain a register that once worked. "This is excessive," he says, and the consequence is Maya's reply arriving calm and final. It's proportionate. Phones lower now, the urge to capture, yielding to the sense that something real is happening that doesn't need an audience to exist. "We'll follow up," the officer says, turning pages, and the consequence is the promise of tomorrow, attaching itself to tonight without drama. The notice letter remains where it is, a simple object doing heavy work, and I feel the arithmetic complete itself inside me. Witness plus record plus process equals an ending that doesn't need applause. I don't speak because nothing I could add would improve the math. The groom's eyes flick to me, once searching for something, permission, maybe, or mercy, and the consequence is my gaze staying level and unresponsive. Not cruel, just finished. "We're concluded here," the supervisor announces, and the consequence is staff opening doors, gently guests exhaling as if released from a held posture. Outside, night air spills in cool and clean, the smell of asphalt, and leaves replacing champagne and wires, and the consequence is relief landing where adrenaline used to sit. Maya gathers her papers, nods once to me, and the consequence is the quiet certainty that justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just shows up and stays. When the letter leaves the podium, the room understands the night has chosen its ending. I stand at the glass podium again, present tense, returning the way breath does after a long hold, and the surface reflects my face, and the room behind me, without distortion, no flattering angles left to negotiate. The ballroom is quieter now, emptied of urgency chairs, nudged out of symmetry by people who left carrying their own versions of the night, and the consequence is space enough to think without being watched. I feel the child shift and place my hand there not to protect, but to acknowledge continuity, because endings matter less than what they allow next. The podium is cool under my palm, smooth, indifferent, and that indifference steadies me. A staffer moves lights down to work mode, not dim, but practical, and the consequence is clarity that doesn't ask for permission. Outside the doors, voices drift and fade, engines start, tires crunch, and the night resumes its ordinary business as if nothing monumental just happened, which is how justice often feels quiet once it's done its work. Daniel passes by with a nod, already turning to tomorrow's logistics, and the consequence is gratitude settling without ceremony, because people who keep systems honest rarely get applause. I replay the night in fragments, the folded guest list, the blue section, the hum of the projector, then let the fragments go, because memory can calcify if you hold it too tightly. The glass shows me standing alone now, posture relaxed for the first time, shoulders dropping as if they've been carrying a load they didn't need to explain. I think about the moment the spotlight came on, and stayed on about how exposure isn't violence when it's accurate, and how accuracy can be kind when it stops a lie from breeding. I breathe in the cool air and taste nothing but clean, the residue of wires replaced by night. A custodian wheels a cart past humming, and the consequence is normalcy asserting itself sturdy and welcome. I don't feel triumphant. I feel finished, which is better. The room holds no secrets now, only echoes that will soften with time. I step away from the podium and glance once more at the reflection, seeing not a victim or a symbol, but a person who stood still long enough for truth to catch up. Nothing survives once the light refuses to dim. I turn toward the exit, the glass catching my movement, and then letting me go, and the night accepts me without comment.